Namaste and welcome to React Bits. In this episode, we are going to learn about the fundamentals of Nest.js or Node.js framework by building a REST API. And if you are following my Flutter State Management Hero series, we will be using this API to build our Flutter application using RiverPod there. So to find the link to my Flutter State Management Hero series, please check the pop-up or find the link in the description below. Before you begin with this tutorial, make sure you have following things. You need to have a code editor installed, and I prefer VS Code. It will be easier for you to follow because I'll be using Visual Studio Code and some of its features. Next, you absolutely need to have Node.js and npm installed, and instead of npm you can also use yarn package manager. Next, I prefer using Docker and Docker Compose over installing all the databases engine, all the other required stuff in my original machine. So if you have a Docker and Docker Compose, that is bonus. But if you don't have, even if you don't have that, you can follow along easily. And then you need to have the basics of JavaScript and some knowledge of TypeScript. So if you have basics of JavaScript and some knowledge of TypeScript, it will be better. But even if you don't have any knowledge of TypeScript or JavaScript, you can still be able to follow, but you may not understand some of the concepts properly. And finally, we'll be working with some terminal or command line. So having a basics of command line will be very fruitful. So let us get started with the fundamentals of Nest.js. You can find more information on Nest.js at their official website at nestjs.com. It's an open source Node.js framework and it is built on top of Express, and it uses TypeScript and provides lots of features. And if you have used Angular front-end framework, then it might look quite similar. The dependency injections and other stuffs, controllers, views, those kind of stuff might look similar to Angular. So let us get started. This will be an intense tutorial because we have to cover lots of things, and we'll have to build a REST API that we can use in our mobile application. So that I'll not be going in depth in all the concepts. I'll be doing a overview and I'll be describing some of the important features and some of the important steps, but will not go in depth of everything. So going in depth requires a separate series for Nest.js itself, which I might consider based on your reaction on this video. So let me know if you have not subscribed, subscribe, and let me know in comments if you'd like to have more tutorials on Nest.js and how to build APIs and backend frameworks with Nest.js. Now let us get started. First, we begin by creating a new project. To do that, we go into our project folder. So I'll be using my JS folder as my project folder. Here, first we need to install Nest.js or Nest.js framework or Nest.js CLI. That we need to do it globally, and for that we can use npm install-g. Okay, with this we can install at nestjs/cli. I have already installed this, so I'll just cancel it. Once you install this, what you can do is you can use a nest command. You can try it with nest help. If it works, then you can see that Nest.js is installed. You can also do nest v to check the version. I'm using 7.5.1 version of Nest.js. And in order to create our new project, we can simply use nest new quiz API. So we'll call it a quiz API. This will bootstrap or scaffold our new project, and it will ask you which package manager would you like to use. npm is by default available when you install Node.js, and if you have yarn, you can use yarn as well. I prefer to use yarn. You can use npm and follow along, it doesn't matter. So this will take some time. It will install all the dependencies and it will create a new Nest.js project for us, which will be opening with our code editor Visual Studio Code and continue on. Here, after your project is created, you will see something like this: successfully created a project, get started with following command and some links. Okay, so what we can do is cd quiz API, and before starting to run, I'd like to open it in Visual Studio Code. For that, I can just use code dot, or you can simply open Visual Studio Code and from there open new folder. So here is our first project, basic scaffold, and let me just commit it in git, first commit, and we have our basic scaffolding of the project. I'll describe the project, but before that, let me run it. And from now on, I'll be using the integrated terminal of VS Code. So let me just close this. Okay. Now, in order to run the project, what we can do is open a terminal in VS Code. You can do that with control and tilde button. If you don't know tilde button, that's the button above your tab button. So you can use that to open the terminal. And if you are on Windows, I suggest you to use Node console instead of PowerShell or command line. So Node console will be better to work with Node.js programs. So once you are here, you can use npm run start dev, or you can run yarn like me. If you are using yarn, then you can use yarn start dev. Once you run this will start our application. It will compile the TypeScript files. So you can see here in src folder, all the files are TypeScript. So it will compile the TypeScript files, and here a new folder, dist folder is created, and all the JS files are created so that it can run. Now what we can do is, in our browser, we can go to localhost 3000 to view hello world. So how this is working, how this hello world comes when we go to this URL. Let's see the basic flow of Nest.js. So Nest.js has controller, modules, and services, and main file. So let us begin from main file. This is where the execution starts. For example, if we check our package.json file, somewhere here there must be main file. Okay, program. Okay, it is not here, so it's not a problem. So the execution starts from main file, and what is here? We are importing Nest factory, and then we are importing our app module. And using Nest factory, we will create a new app. If you are working with Express.js or any other Node.js framework like Fastify, you do something similar, but you will be using the Node.js like format. You will not be using this modern syntax and modern classes that TypeScript provides. So we are creating a new app from nestfactory.create, and in here we are passing our root module. So Nest.js app requires a root module. And then next step is we have app.listen 3000. So this is the port number that our server is listening at. So that is why we can run this at localhost 3000. If we instead use another port, then we cannot connect. At 3000 we are listening, and then we are running this bootstrap function. So we created this. Now when we go to this 3000 URL, how do we get this hello world? So let us check first module. So our module doesn't seem to have anything, but it has a module decorators. So I'll not be going in depth with decorators. Decorators are advanced features that are provided by TypeScript and Nest.js. These decorators are created by Nest.js that we can use. So a module is always decorated by @module, and it has few parameters like imports, controllers, providers. And imports are other modules. So in app module you can import other modules. So later on when we create other modules, that will be imported into app modules. And then controllers are controllers that handle the request and send response. We'll see that in a bit. And service are extra providers or extra classes that help controller carry on their function. So let us go to controller. Okay, so in the app controller we have a controller decorator, that is what decides that this is a controller. And then we have a constructor that instantiates this app service. We'll look at the app service in a bit. And then we have a get decorator. So at get decorator tells that this is a get method. And in REST API, if you remember, there are get, put, post, patch, delete, those kind of requests. So if you don't know that, you need to learn the fundamentals of REST API. So once we have the get method, this will understand that this route should be called or this function should be called when we get. And as the controller doesn't have any parameter, as well as get doesn't have any parameter, so this is our root route. So when we go to localhost 3000 / that is root route, we get this. We call this function. So controller runs this function. And what this function is doing is that it is delegating its service and returning the value from app service. So it's calling app service. So what we do is we keep the controller as clean as possible and only do request and response related stuff in the controller. And all the other things that we need to do, like getting data from database or saving data to database, those kind of stuff, we tend to delegate to the services. And if we go to service is always decorated with injectable class, injectable decorator. And this is what tells the Nest.js to create an instance whenever this service is passed in the constructor. So this app service, we are declaring the type here. So this tells the Nest.js to create an instance if it doesn't already exist of app service and provide it to this class. And this is dependency injection, which is automatically handled by Nest.js. Now in app service, finally, what we do is we have a get hello function that we are calling from our controller, and it returns simply a string hello world. Okay, and everything like setting the response type, response status code, all of this is done by Nest.js itself by default. We do not have to do it, but we can do it if we need to manually as well. However, we do not need to do it in most of the cases. Here we are simply returning hello world. We could do that simply from here, but for the purpose of showing the idea how Nest.js works, this basic scaffold is what is the standard structure to work with Nest.js. So we'll be creating our own controllers, modules, and services. All right. So I hope you understand the basic flow. If you do not, please go to their websites. They have a great documentation. You can go to docs.nestjs.com. They have a great set of documentations. Read it. You can follow along. They have tutorials and recipes that you can follow along. So now that we know the basics of Nest.js, we understand the basic architecture, we can simply start to create our API. And we'll have a quiz API in which we'll have two things, categories and questions. So in each category, we can add multiple questions and we can add multiple categories. So we need a REST API for categories and then a REST API for questions. So we'll begin with category, and once we know how to create one endpoint or one REST API format for categories like get, put, post, and update, delete, those kind of stuff, then we can simply use same logic and create our questions API as well. So let us get started. First, let me clean up few things. So we are not going to be testing because we do not have time. And let me remove the specs that is for test. And let me remove app service. We'll not be using this as well. And in app controller, let me remove this constructor and this function as well. I think we'll not be using this app controller as well. And let's remove this from here, this here, and here. So we'll be creating our new module. So we want categories API. So we'll create a new module. And in order to create a new module, we can simply use our terminal. So I can add a new terminal in VS Code simply by clicking this plus button. So add a terminal. Then I can use nest G for generate and module. So we can generate a module, and for that we can simply write the name of our module. So it will be categories module. So once we run this command, it will automatically generate a folder called categories. Inside that it will add a categories.module.ts file, and then in app.module.ts, in imports, categories module is imported by default. Because the app module is our root module, we need to import all other modules that we have defined in our app module. Now that we have a module, let me generate controller and services similarly. Nest G controller categories. Now if we go to categories module, the categories controller is automatically added to the controllers once we generate. And again, this is spec, we do not need it. Then again, let's generate nest G service categories, and we can use no spec to prevent generating the test file. So now we have categories service, and if we check categories module, again categories service is automatically imported. Now if we remember the previous code, we can go to our controller. Now what we can see is in controller decorator, we have added categories is automatically added. So what this does is, instead of the root route, it will create a /category route. So this will be /categories. So let me quickly create a function here at get, and this get has to be imported from Nest.js common. VS Code is automatically importing it for us. And this function name can be anything. You can put anything as your function name. So we have get hello. We can call this method anything, and return type we can pass string. Here we will return hello from category. Okay. Now if we go to our browser, if we run localhost 3000, we get 404 because we do not have the root route. So instead what we can do is we can use categories. Now we have hello from category. This is how this hello from category is coming. Let me just keep this side by side so it's easier. Okay, and let me zoom out. So I hope this is visible. Now we get hello from category, and we can even pass parameter get. Inside here we can even pass a string in get decorator category /hello. Now again this will give 404, and instead what we can do is category /hello. So again we get this hello from category, but we are not doing this. So let me just remove this. First create a constructor as we saw in the app module to instantiate read only category service. Again this has to be imported. VS Code is automatically importing it for me. So what this does is this will inject the category service, and we can use category service in our controller. So now let's create a get, and here get all. This will return all the categories. Right now there is no return type, and we'll simply call this dot categories service dot get all, and in category service again we will create get all function. So here get all, and we'll simply let us return an empty array for now. So if we do this, now if I go to categories, I should get empty array, and it's not working. Let's see, it's not, yeah, we do not have the type, so it is not giving us sorry, we forgot to return. So return this. Once we return, now we get an empty array. Now we need to have a type declaration so that we can return list of categories. So first, inside categories folder, what I'll do is create a new file, category.module.ts, and here we'll create a class, and it will simply have, category will have title string, description string. Okay, now we can use this category module. So let us go to categories service. Let us create here categories, that will be category, list of category, empty. Let us create an empty list of categories, and this category has to be imported. Okay, now that we have the list of categories, we can simply return here this dot categories, and here we can define the return type as category. Okay, and also in categories controller, we can define the return type as category array of category. Okay, so again, if we check the route, we have the same output, and we can check that everything is running, there is no error. Now let us create some dummy categories so that we can see it in our request. For that, first we need to add a constructor, and also we forgot to add export to this category, so we need to export this. And after exporting, we now have a problem. We need to import these categories in service and in controller. That was not done before, as I forgot to export it. So now we can create a constructor and title string, description optional string. So this question mark here marks this description as a optional parameter. This dot title description. So now we have a constructor. We can create new instances here. So new category, general knowledge, let's add some description here, movies, sports. Okay, now if we perform the request, we should get the list of these two categories. So now we perform the request, and sure enough, we get these two categories as output. Okay, now we will create, now that we have a route to get a list of category, next we'll add the route to add new category. And for that, let us create like post, there is a like get, there is a post decorator. So to create new, we use a post decorator. Again, this post has to be imported from Nest.js common. Create category. This should return the category. Okay, and we'll simply return this dot category service dot add category. Okay, and in category service, we'll create add category function. This should return category. just simply returning new category so that we do not have error here. However, what happens is with a post request, we send a body where we pass the details of our categories, right? Details of title and description. Then we can create our category using that. And for that, we create something called data transfer object, DTO. And it is similar to modal. Data transfer object is similar to modal. It is just a class that defines what data should be available in the transfer model. So here I'll create a new folder called DTO, and in here I'll create category.dto.ts. okay, and here simply I'll create export class create category DTO, and again create category should expect two parameter, title string and then description string. Okay, and from now on I'll not be using web browser. Instead I'll be using some plugin in VS Code in order to perform the API request. I'll show you that in a bit. So first we have a create category DTO. Then in controller we have something called @body decorator. So this body will provide us with the request body, and here this will be our create category DTO of type create category DTO. So this expects that our create category or the body we send in this post route should match this parameter. Okay, and we'll simply pass this to our service, and again in service create category DTO, and we need to import this. You can see that it is automatically imported. You always need to remember to export and import. So now here what we can do is we can pass create category DTO.title, category DTO.description. okay, and we return this new category, and in category controller we are simply returning this. So whenever we add new category we should get back the same category. All right, now in VS Code, in order to perform REST request, I use something called REST client. It is an extension that you can install in VS Code. Going to this extensions panel and then REST client, you can simply install it. And using this REST client, we can create and perform REST API simply from our VS Code. For that, I'll create a new folder in my root project, that is HTTP, and this name, you can give any name to this HTTP. And in this, I'll create a file called category.http. okay, and this extension has to be HTTP for this extension to recognize and perform HTTP request. And here I'll declare a variable @base URL will be our base URL for the API is HTTP localhost 3000, and for categories our base path will be, let's say for categories itself our base URL will be /categories, right? So once we have this, we can simply perform a request here like this, get then URL, that is our base URL. okay, we can simply do this http/1.1, so http 1.1, and after writing this you can see a send request option here, and once we tap this our request is sent and we get the same result as we saw in the browser. But in browser we cannot easily perform post request and other request, so we'll be using this extension. Now you see how we can perform get request. Let's see how we can perform post request and create new category. So to separate multiple requests you add 3 hashes, then let's create next request, that will be post, and again URL, http 1.1, and in post request you give content header. You can give headers here, so content type application JSON, and finally one space, and we can provide the body. So body expects title of our category will be, let's say, new category technology. We do not want any description, so we create a route, we post to this route. So we have already seen this route in browser. So now if we send a request, it should create a new category, but it is returning empty. But if we get category, the new category is not even available. That is because we have not properly added it. So let's go to our category service. Let me make this smaller. Okay, what we need to do is here category equal to this is new category, and then we need to this dot categories dot push. So we need to add to this array new category, and then finally return category. Now when we create new category, let's say we send a request, we should get back our category, but again we are not getting our category. So let's create a request, empty category is being added. Let's see what is going on. New category, let us log. Create category DTO. So what we are receiving, that should be shown in the debug panel here. Once we send request, we are receiving the title. Okay, so here we are creating new category. Oh, I think the spelling error here, this should have been title. So let me go to DTO and fix this title. Now this should work. So when I send a request, I add new category, I get back the category. Now if I get a list of categories, now we have 3. We can add more. Similarly, if I do this request multiple times, if I get, now I have same category repeated multiple times. Okay, so we now have create category, and I think we are missing some ID field here. We need a ID field, but we'll not be adding this because later when we use database, ID field will be automatically created by our database. But usually we have an ID field so that we can recognize the unique title and do some operations like delete and update. But for now, we'll keep it as it is. Now that we can get the category and add category, let's just simply create a delete category and update category functions, but we'll complete those by adding database connections. So here, first in controller, let's say in here in service, I'll create delete category, and for this we most of the time we get ID string and then we delete by ID. But for now, we'll check the ID with the title. We don't have ID, so find index. So we don't have category, so we use title equals ID. Okay, so if index is equals -1, sorry, this, let's make this index. If index equals -1, we just throw not found exception. we need to create new not found exception, otherwise we'll return. First we'll delete is equal to categories index, and then we'll delete this dot categories dot splice comma 1. So we'll remove this category and we'll simply return category. This return type will again be category. All right, so now we can perform delete category. Let me first get category. As our server is restarted and this is hard coded, we only get these two. Let me add one. So I have added one. Now we can send a delete request, but first I think we need to create a route. So here, like post, we again create delete. Again, this has to be imported, and here we get, so this should be like ID. For delete, we pass in ID here, and this ID that we get in URL should be requested here as param. Okay, ID string okay, we just call the service and return type is category. Now let us first send a request. We have added new category. If we get, we have 3 categories. Now let us create our delete request. Again 3 hash, separate the request, and for delete and base URL http 1.1, I think slash, we need to pass technology because we need to pass the ID here in the URL. Okay, now if we send a request, we get back the category that is deleted, and if we check now, we have only 2 categories. Okay, so our delete request is working as well. Finally, we can make 2 other options here. One, get by ID string. It should again return a single category. This dot categories dot find category title ID. We are using title instead of ID. If not category, then again we throw new not found exception, category not found, and finally return this category. So here again we create another get request to get by ID. Get base URL slash technology. Now if we call it, we should get 404 because initially we don't have this technology category. Okay, we get 404. But now instead of this, if we create entertainment, let me check enter, let me just copy this and send this. Okay, it's not working. Categories not found. Let's check here. Okay, we have not even created the route, so here we need to create a route at get, and again here ID and get by ID at param ID string return type category, return this dot category service dot get by ID, right? Okay, now we should be able to perform this request. Let me just remove this. Okay, so now if I perform this request, I get back entertainment, but if I change the name, I get back again 404 category not found. So we now have almost all the things except for update. So we'll be doing the update after adding the database connection. So we now understand how to perform basic operations in Nest.js. So we have created a basic API that has get function, post and delete. We can create new object, we can get all the object, we can get single object by ID, and then we can delete object. We'll also be simply able to update the object in similar way that we'll see in the next part after adding database. So next we'll move on to adding database connection. Now we are ready to connect to a database, and for this tutorial we will be using Mongodb database. You can go to their website and learn to set up it locally, or you can use Docker like I am doing, or you can even use Mongodb Atlas. Okay, so in order to connect to different databases, I'll show you how we can do those in a bit. First we'll install the necessary dependencies for Nest.js to work with MongoDB. So for that we will install yarn add, or if you are using npm, you can use npm install -- save. Okay, so what we'll install is Nest.js Mongoose, and one more package, config, for managing our configurations. Okay, we can use config for configurations, and JS-YAML for reading YAML configuration files. We'll install these dependencies. It might take some time depending on your internet connection. Okay, it's installing. Okay, and we add some dev dependencies in order to make it better to work with TypeScript. So yarn add -- dev, or if you are using npm, you can use npm install -- save dev. Add types mongoose and add types config. We'll add type descriptions for mongoose and config. Okay, now that we have added the dependencies, we are ready to create a database and connect to our database. And I'll show you how to create and connect a database in MongoDB Atlas. So in order to work with MongoDB Atlas, open mongodb.com/cloud/atlas and sign in, or try for free, start for free if you have not created account. So I already have an account. I will log in using my Google account. Once logged in, you will be redirected to your clusters. I already have a cluster, but if you do not have, you can create a new cluster and choose free cluster. But I already have one cluster which is free, so I'll not be adding anymore. So you can select the default, all the default configuration to create a new cluster. Once you have created the cluster, you can see something like this, and in here you can use this connect button to get the connection string. In connect, you can choose connect to your application and copy this URL. So this URL is what we'll be using in our configurations in order to connect to our database. Okay, this is how we can use MongoDB Atlas. So if you cannot or unable to set up MongoDB locally, use MongoDB Atlas instead. Okay, now that we have the connection setups, we will create our configurations. For that, in the root of a project, I'll again create a config folder, and inside that I'll create 3 files: default.yml, that is default configuration, then .development.yml, this is configuration during development and production. So this default config is available whether it is development environment or production environment. However, production and deployment configs are available only in particular environment. So in default, I'll set up some of the things like under server, I'll have a port that is 3000. Okay, and DB. So I'll be using local DB here. So in URI, you use the connection URL that you get from MongoDB at last. However, here I'll be using my local URL because I have a local MongoDB database setup. MongoDB/root, and my password is root pass localhost 27017 / quiz API DB. This is the name of the database, and then auth source equals admin. So this is my database URI. You can use your local URI if you have set up locally, or URI provided by the MongoDB Atlas. And then this is all we need for default. And in development and production right now, we don't need any more configurations. We are just keeping this here so that later when we deploy, we might add some configurations, different configurations to production, like server port might be different in production, those kind of things. Okay, so we have a default configurations here. We need to load config and use. So we'll start by using this port in our server config. Let me close all, and our server config should be loaded in main.ts. For that, we'll import asterisk as config from config. Okay, and here we'll load server config equals config.get server. This is how we get this server config defined here. And now in server config, we can use simply server.port. Okay, and this type should be, let's define any server config.port. Okay, and one more thing, I would like to be able to override this port from environment, and we can simply access environment variables in Node.js applications as, let's say, I'll create a new variable called port, and this will be equal to process.env. So if I have set an environment, port environment, then I'll use that. However, if that is not available, I'll use server config.port. Okay, and now instead of this, I can use port. Okay, this is working. So we should check the terminal if there is any error. So there are no errors, it's still working. Now we need to set up our database. So let us move to app module. Here we need to set up our Mongoose module. So in app.module.ts, in imports, what we need to add is Mongoose module. We need to import Mongoose module, and here we need to set up for root. Okay, and for root we need to pass in our URI, database URI. So Mongoose requires a database URI that we have kept here. So to get that, first here equals first import config, and same like server config, we can do config.get db. This will get us db config, and here we can use db.uri. Okay, this type again, this db should be of type any. So now we don't have any error. So if we have connection problem, let's say if I change this password something else, then we'll get a connection error here. So now if I change something here, see, I get unable to connect to database. So if we do not get any error, that means we have successfully connected to our database. And here again, in production, I would like to provide the DB URI from the environment. So here again, I will use environment variable. So process.env.dburi or db.uri. So if this dburi does not exist, then only we'll use the dburi from configurations. So in production, we do not want to expose our database username and password and other stuff. So we use it from environment variable instead of configurations. Now we have set up Mongoose module. We need to do more things like schema. We need to define a schema for our category. So we change our category model to define a Mongoose schema. So in the top, we'll import asterisk as mongoose from mongoose. We import mongoose, and then here we'll create a schema. Export const will create a category schema that will be new mongoose.sc schema. Okay, and here we'll have similar, we'll describe it similar like our class title, but the type will be capital string, not a small s for string. And we can provide some more parameters as object like this. So if we make this type a string and then required true, so title is required, again another description required false. Okay, we have category schema, and we simply extend this category. Let's change this to interface. So as an interface, it will not require constructor, and then this should extend mongoose.document, extends mongoose.document, and it should have. Now we cannot create new category like this, so we have an error. We'll fix that, we'll keep on fixing, but first we'll go to our category module. So in category module, we need to define our Mongoose module again in imports Mongoose module, but this time for feature, okay, not for root. And in here we'll pass our schemas. So we can pass array of schemas, but we have only one, that is first name of schema. Name will provide category, and then schema is our category schema, which is automatically imported, and comma. So we import module and our schema. After importing this, we can provide some features related to Mongoose in our controllers and services. Okay, so now we'll go on to update our category service so that it will use database instead of memory. So let us move to categories. Here we do not need this, let's remove this, and here we'll remove this, and we'll create a constructor. We'll inject a Mongoose module. So to do that, we'll create a constructor, and here private read only category model, and this will be of type model, and this model is coming from Mongoose. You can see it here, model, and this will be of type category. Okay, and this is our constructor. And for this category model to be available, we need to add a decorator here. I inject model. So this model is coming from, again, inject model is coming from Nest.js Mongoose. Okay, we need to inject nest.js model, otherwise it will not work. And we need to pass in the name of our schema, that is category. This is the name that we have provided while registering Mongoose module for feature. Okay, I know this is a bit overwhelming and a bit lot to take in, but if you know the basic concept, you can follow along, and later on you can go to Nest.js documentation, you can read more about these concepts there. And if you want, if you like, I can add more videos on this series with more detailed descriptions of all these things. Okay, now instead of this, our function will become async, and this will be promise of category array, and here we'll return this dot category model dot find return. So this is how we load all the data available in this collection from MongoDB using Mongoose. This is how simple it is. Once we inject our model, register our modules, we can simply call this. So we'll do the same for add category. So for add category, what we'll do is, let's remove this. Let's remove all of this for now. And here we'll create new category model. We create a new instance of category model, then title, description, and then we simply call await category dot save, and here we'll use async, and this will return promise category, not the category, and finally we'll return category. Okay, now for get by id, again it is very simple. Let's remove this. Let's again make this async, and let's make this promise, and here await this dot category model dot find by id. We pass in id and then execute. Okay, and if not category, will simply throw new not found exception. Category was not found, and finally if we found, we will return category. Okay, and same for delete category. And we'll make this async, and this will be promise, and category will be await this dot category model dot by id and remove. Okay, id, execute, and we'll return this category. So we have delete category, we have get by id, we have add category. It's all working. We'll create update category in a bit. First let us fix this. So this will again be promise, promise, so all the errors should be gone and we should be able to successfully build. Now let us run our HTTP. So if we run, let's check, can we get? Yeah, so we are getting empty array. So if I add new, I get this underscore id. This is automatically created by our database. So now what I can do is, if I get all, then I get new. Here let's create another entertainment description okay, send. So we create another. If we get now, we get 2, and we can simply copy this ID and try to get by ID. So if we get by ID, we get a single category, and we can even delete by ID. We can delete, we get same back. Now if we get, we should see only 1. Okay, so our get, put, delete, get, post and delete is working. Now let us create update. So how we can update? For that, we'll create a service. In category service, we'll create update category. So we'll need ID of the category to update, and then we'll use the same DTO for updating as well. So we'll not create another separate DTO, and again this will return the category that we will update. So for getting the category, const equals await. We can use the same get by ID function, so that if it is not found, we are using this same function. So if this is not found, it will simply throw the exceptions and will not do the updates. And now in order to update, we need to check existing values. So if new values have come, then we'll update. If new values are empty, then we'll keep the old values. So here we'll check if create category dto.title. If new title has arrived, then we'll simply call update category.title equals create category dto.title. Same for the description. Okay, and finally we'll call category dot save and return category. Okay, and we'll create a controller method for updating, that will be patch ID and body. We get create category DTO again, and simply will return this dot category service dot update category ID and DTO, and this type should be promise category. Okay, promise category. So now we have an update route. We can check it. We can simply check it. Let's get. So as now we are using database, our data will not be lost. So we have our category that we created earlier. Let's change to add 2 categories. General knowledge, send. Sorry, this. Okay, we have 2 categories now. If we see, we have 2 categories. Now we can create update request. So for that, we can simply copy this. Okay, and instead of post, we'll make it patch, and here we'll need an ID. Let's update this entertainment category. So slash this, and again application JSON, that's fine. We'll just update the description. We want to remove the entertainment there. So movies, sports, games, video games. So if we send a request, see our description is updated and we get back the request. And we can even change the title. Let's make it technology. So if we make it technology, sorry, we forgot the comma here, and send a request, our category title is updated. So if we send a get request for all categories, we now have technology and general knowledge. So this is how we can create a CRUD API for categories. And following the same principle, we can create the CRUD for the questions. Let us generate our questions module, service, and controller. So first, nest G for module shortcut is mo question. Okay, we'll generate a questions module. So we now have another folder called question, and we have a module. Again, nest G co controller dash no spec. We have questions controller. Okay, and same for the service, nest G yes no spec. Okay, so we have questions, and we'll add a DTO. So DTO folder again, and here we'll add create question DTO, and again we'll add one more, that is question model, question.model.ts. So we have our controller, model, DTO, and everything. I'll simply copy paste it here, and I'll simply describe, because it is exactly same as the category. So let me just copy paste. So first, the questions model. So again, we are importing Mongoose, we are defining schema, and here we have some more options like question, it is a string and required. Options, it is of type array of strings. Okay, and I think this is required true, this should have been true. And answer, again answer is a string, required true. And category ID, so question should belong to a category, so we pass in category ID, it is a string, and again required. And we create again interface for question, that is ID, question, option, answer, category ID. All right, so we have our questions model. Then I'll paste the details of the question service. Okay, I'll just describe these questions I need to import here, and import inject model as well, and import model from Mongoose as well. Okay, there is one more thing, get questions filter DTO, that I'll copy here, and in questions DTO I'll paste it here. Get questions class validator. So I think we are not using this validator here, so I'll just simply remove these things. Okay, and let me import this, and not found exceptions. Let's import this. Let's import create questions DTO again. So create questions DTO, we need to, let me copy this as well. Here is my create questions DTO, which I can again import to service. Okay, so now I have the create questions service, and there is one additional function here that we can filter question using various parameters that I'll show in just a bit. But let me complete the setup here. Let me copy and paste the questions controller as well. Okay, we have the questions controller, and let me remove this validation pipe. I'm not using validation in this tutorial. Okay, and I'll also copy the questions HTTP file that will help us make the questions HTTP request. It is similar to category but for questions. So let me show you. Okay, I need to update the module as well. So questions module. Here we need to add the Mongoose module. Import questions schema. Okay. So let's describe the what is happening here. So I have again questions module. Here we are importing Mongoose module for feature, and we are passing in the schema that we created in our questions model. Here we have a questions schema. Okay, this is simple. We did the same for our category. Then we have a create category DT, create question DTO that has questions, options, answers, and category ID. This is simple as well. Then we have questions controller. First we have get all, but there is additional feature here that we can pass in query string to filter our questions. We'll see that. And we have this get questions by category by passing category ID. This is another extra facility, and others is similar to category. So get by ID, and this add new question, update question, and delete question. It is exactly same as that of category. And if we look at the question service, this filter is a bit different. Okay, sorry, again question controller, question service. If we look at question service, this get all function is a bit different than our categories. We'll look at that, but others it is similar. So get by ID, get category questions. So this is get the questions for a particular category, which is also possible with this filter. And then we have add question and update question. We are doing the same what we did with the category. Okay, we have a create question DTO, and we are checking if each value exists, and we are updating it. And finally we have delete question. That is exactly same as the category. Now we'll look at this filter DTO and this filter function, how it is working. So first let us add some questions. Okay, let us go to category, get a list of categories, and let's get a ID for one category. Let's say technology. And in questions controller, sorry, questions HTTP, let's use take category, and the ID is this. Let's remove this, and question ID, let us not remove this. Let's not use. Okay, so we can get list of questions which is empty right now, but we can add a question. So we can use take category. Okay, we'll add a new question, just simply a dummy question post. So we have added a new question. Now if we get questions, we'll get list of questions. And here again, take category, and let's add few more so that we have 1 2 3 4 questions. And let's add to another category. So if we, okay, that's fine. So we have added few questions here. Now we'll see how the filter works. So in filter, if I add limit equals 1, then we'll get only one question. Okay, we can again add offset equals 1. We are getting question with ID DE5. If we add offset 1, we'll get a next question DE6. Okay, we are simply using this limit and offset, and we are passing in category ID to get a questions for a particular category. And we can see how we have defined the get questions filter DTO. So the filter DTO has category ID, limit, offset, order by, order type. So we can even order descending or order ascending by a particular field, and this is how we are using it. So we have a filter DTO. If category ID is defined, we are passing query dot where category ID. And to be able to learn about this, how to use this questions model, how to make these queries, you need to learn the documentation of Mongoose. So we are using Mongoose here to perform all these operations, this Mongoose. Okay, the model comes from Mongoose, and you can see the docs of Mongoose to learn more about how these operations are performed, how we can get by ID, how we can perform complex queries like this. So we can get a list of questions based on this filter DTO. Okay, so this is how simply we can create a quiz API with categories and questions, and question can be in each category. We can filter the questions using different options. I hope this tutorial was useful for you to get some ideas on how we can build our own API using Node.js, and in this context using Nest.js or Node.js framework. If you did like my video, please like, share and subscribe. If you want more tutorials on Nest.js, please let me know in comments. Also, we'll be using this API in our Flutter State Management Hero series tutorial. So it's better if you learn it. If not, if you do not want to learn how to build your own API, you can simply deploy this API in Heroku for free. I'll show you that how to do that in my Flutter tutorial. So you can deploy this in Heroku and use that in order to use with Flutter application tutorials. Thank you everyone. See you again in the next video.